Good afternoon. It's a bit interesting to be after a couple of sessions because it puts yourself in the pecking order of what's impressive. And I think after this morning session around Watson, I think it's a pretty tall order to get across. But on the other hand, it gets you excited about what you're trying to talk about. And when I picked this topic in November, December to think about what would be interesting, I realized there's nothing I'm going to be able to say that no one has seen in another presentation or have heard from someone else speaking about it. Because the topic about how banking is going to change has been publicized for the last 5 years. I think the difference is it's becoming real now. And what I'm hoping to do today is just to take you through some different thoughts that I've picked up through looking at different research and trying putting it into a perspective that may make you think about where banking can go in the future. So I'm incredibly excited to be here, but I have to do something before we start the session because my mother wouldn't believe that I've got a suit on. It doesn't happen often. And I don't know, somehow I thought I would have to wear a suit if I'm talking about banking. And the second thing is my mother wouldn't believe that my name would be on such a big billboard ever. So if I just need to ask my wife, who's sitting there in the corner, just to take a picture of me next to the slide with the billboard. Yeah, I think she's got it. Now the next one is just, I need to take another one because my kids would also like to see this. So if I can just, do the dab. Maybe that was a bit too much. What you've experienced is a little bit of my take on the social phenomenon. We do this every day. We take pictures, we do stupid things, we embarrass ourselves. We go and stand next to the road and you try and take a picture of Arion and there's a gazillion buses coming by, but you will take that picture. And then you're going to send it to your friends and they're going to comment on it. And as banks, we often asked, what are we doing to compare with the social media out there? But if you take a step back, it's interesting to think about why this social phenomenon? Why are we so interested in it? I did some research, and it's not very scientific. I went to the internet and I searched for a lot of papers on why people like social media. And some of the phrases that came up is, it's cool. I get a lot of information. Obviously, we're taking selfies. I get visibility of what's happening, what my friends are doing. The interesting thing is even people believe, it's a trust thing. I can use it to log into so many different websites out there. If you consider all of these statements, you can kind of summarize it into 5 thoughts. We use it because it's convenient. It's on our phone. Doesn't matter where we are, we can interact socially with everybody and anybody that we want to. It's fun. I'm not particularly good at this social phenomenon. But you can do fun things. You have these funky, I don't know what you call it, filters that you put on the pictures. And someone showed me Snapchat once. I think it's an incredibly interesting phenomenon, Snapchat itself. And they told me the most fun are some of those filters. And I'm not getting it, but clearly people enjoy it. There's lots of information on it. I've spoken about the trust. But the other interesting thing is it creates emotional connection. Now that is something that if you have ever looked into psychology and a lot of the theory about the human interaction, we've always believed that one of the critical things for emotional connection is that human interaction. Yet when I see a picture of a puppy, people go, oh, cute. If I see that when people follow the ugliest dog in the world that's got an Instagram feed, all of those things are about creating an emotional connection. And we have crossed the boundary from creating physical emotional connections to digital emotional connections. So the next thought that then came up was we were at a conference the other day and Trend Watching was presenting. It's a very interesting company. And they spoke about this expectation economy, where without us realizing it, we have elevated our expectations of what we believe is the minimum level of convenience that what we want. Everything has to work. I guess I'm lucky enough that I still grew up in the days that you had to have a payphone, and you had to use the payphone with physical coins. That payphone very seldom worked, and that was your key mode of communication to get a ride home from your parents or whatever the case may be. Today, it just has to work. If there's no signal, we're annoyed with the cell phone providers. So we've lifted our expectations. We expect to be delighted. We expect to have that nugget. You know, when I open a new app, there must be something in there that is going to let me think, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't know you can do that. If it's not there, then we get rid of the app. And it has to be personalized to me and know when I want to be delighted. You know, don't send me a notification in the middle of the night about some special offer that I may be fantastically interested in when I'm awake, but not when I'm asleep. So it needs to be able to predict for what I need. But the other interesting comment that they made is that all of these expectations, if you actually look beyond them, relates to basic needs, things that we as intrinsically humans want and need. It's not superfluous things that we can just, it's not nice to have, I guess is the right way of putting it. And I think if you talk about some of the expectation economy and how it's evolved, Andrew McAfee from MIT did this experiment with a lot of people taking rides in the Google driverless car. And it's astonishing to see how they went from scared of being out of control to be bored and being on their phones within 15 minutes. And you've got to think, here is something that we're fundamentally changing. We are not used to not being in control of a car. I can do another talk about just the notion of how driving on roads is such a fundamental trust thing. Because you've got to trust that the car from the other side knows the rules, will obey the rules, and will not hit you, and there's nothing preventing that, apart from the trust that you have in someone that you completely don't know. And now you're going to a point where you're taking even that control that you had, because part of driving is, well, if the other guy is drunk or if he doesn't know the rules, at least I can get out of the way. That's what we thought. Now we're taking that away. Yet, we get bored in 15 minutes. I thought this was astonishing. The other interesting concept was the idea of, as much as we like to think we're different, we are always creatures of habit. There's so many books out there in terms of creating habits and the habits of highly effective people. And I think all of us have read that over the years. But the current research and a lot of the work that Apple and Google and those companies are doing are based on this notion of there's a trigger that needs to happen for you to be able to follow, to create a habit. That trigger must then have a routine that you can action, and then you must have reward. We're not very different to dogs. We just recently got a border collie, which is quite a interesting concept, having a dog in Iceland. But how do you treat a dog? Now, there's the trigger, they want to go out and pee. You need to take an action. You go outside, and then you reward the dog. And within a couple of times of doing that, the dog knows they have. We are exactly the same. And the challenge is for us as banks, but also other organizations, is how do you know what are some of those triggers? You know, the trigger could be a time thing. It could be based on where you are, what's location, what you're walking past, what's your emotional state, what other people are doing or saying at that point in time. That action that you take, that routine, needs to be something that is unique to me and allows me to take an action that will give me the reward that I'm looking for. You know, get that sense of achievement and the sense of excitement. So that's a kind of another thought that if you look at the expectation economy, the habit forming, the social phenomenon, now, all of these things are what's happening out there, and we saw lots of good examples this morning about what technology is doing in that space. Then it makes you wonder, why do banks exist? Is this a basic need that we have to have banks? Or is it something that got created over time? And this thought came to me late one night, and I may have to admit that I did have a beer or two at the time, but I've subsequently tested it with people, and it does seem to resonate a little bit. But banks were not created on the 8th day of the creation story. For those of you that don't know the Bible, there's only 7 days in the creation story, and the banks weren't created on the 8th day. If you think about it, there's 3 key concepts underpinning the existence of banks. The first one is trust. Before we started living in a world that is global and we interacting with people all over the world, I could go to you and I could give you a fish for a sheep. And I knew I would get what I was looking for. I didn't need to trust anybody else. It was between me and you, and this was a barter trade at that moment. But what's changed now is I'm giving you firstly something that is indirectly linked to what you need. I may be doing this transaction over the internet, millions of miles away from you. There's a need for a third party to play that trust role, to make sure that what I give you is valuable, and I would be able to use it to buy for whatever I need. But it's also giving the trust to say that, I am good for what I'm giving you, and I have this cash. The second thought is access. Now, what do I mean by access here? When I tested this concept with some of my team the other day, it is interesting how the words that we used and to describe the kind of transactions that you can do in banking. We have all of these fancy terminology that we like to use. But the fact of the matter is, there are certain core key things that we do. We have an asset of some sort, cash, be it money, just call it money. And then I need to be able to process that. I need to be able to transact that. So when you think back to the olden days of branches without online banking, you took your little book there. The lady behind the teller wrote in the transaction. She went to the bank booth, wrote in the same transaction there, and she transferred the money. But we needed access to this financial system. And then the third thing is, the information and the empathy side of things. We are, not only in banking, but in IT, known for using acronyms. I've been sitting here today looking on Google, what does this acronym mean? Because we just use it as if it's normal language. We expect people to know it. And we do the same with financial products. We talk about leveraging your balance sheet. And then you think to yourself, but I don't have a balance sheet. I've just got debt. What does this thing mean? And I don't understand all of these things. So people needed an entity to be able to explain to you what is it that you actually need and what you do. But there's also the reality that not all of us are comfortable with money. We get stuck, and some people get nervous. And a colleague of mine, when I was at Many Guys, a presentation where he talks about, if people get so anxious that they would rather get their credit card declined at the point of sale than to look at their balance. So how do you bring that empathy into it? And that's part of what the role is of bankers. And you get into a branch and people can talk and assess and tell you it's not too bad, and you're not going to be locked up and so forth. You're not going to lock your house. So those are interesting concepts to say, well, if that's the fundamental reasons why banks exist, and if you think back to some of the other comments I've made around the social phenomenon, the expectation economy, and those kind of things, you start seeing that there's correlation between these topics. So what's been happening over the last couple of years? I'm going to run through a couple of stats here, but people have seen this all over the place. 40% of mobile banking users are millennials. Gumi was talking about how the interface will change, and we won't be doing things the way you used to do it. My kids, your kids, they've grown up in a completely different age. I try and explain to my kids what a dial-up modem sounds like, and they've got no idea. But they are used to this new technology and way of doing things. 80% of people use social media while they're with their friends. It tells us how we've extended our concept of what being social means. And the other interesting thing about it, 31% of the people actually use mobile banking apps while they're with their friends in a social construct. 73% of millennials are saying that they will in the future consider using technology providers for banking. The counter stat of that is today, most people, after everything the banks have done, still trust banks more than they trust technology companies. The least trusted technology companies that people have said in surveys that they would trust for banking is Facebook and Snapchat. So there's an interesting thing here that even though we are very comfortable with using the social media, there's still an element of saying, well, maybe we understand the fact that if I'm not paying for anything, then I am the product. And that's a lot that sits behind the technology offerings that's out there. And then you've seen, the mobile banking stats have increased massively. And, if I look at just some of the Arion stats here, in the last year, you could see that we've had significant growth in mobile banking, whilst online solutions stayed pretty stable. The interesting thing here is if I go back to the comment about why banks exist, the most of what we've done in the online channels today is automating the access part, your ability to access the banking system. So instead of having the lady filling out your book that you had to have in the past, you now do it online, a transaction. But you still just have access to the banking transactions. So let's look a little bit closer to these technology companies. All of these brands are quite well known. There's two, I guess, depending on how much you read. Alibaba makes Amazon look like a startup company. It's massive. If you've ever gone to the East, it's a massive conglomerate of technology companies. And then Rakuten there on the left is a retailer. They are the third largest retailer in Japan. They are, however, the largest online bank in Japan. And they started as a retailer. Alibaba that I've mentioned, they have got the biggest money market fund in the world, even if you compare it to all the other banks out there. They've got a loan book of $96 billion. Compare that to Amazon, that's got a loan book of $3 billion. The point behind this slide is that we've already moved into the world where the lines are getting blurred between technology companies and banks. And the big difference between the banking world and these companies are, in the banking world, I've got to go somewhere else to do my banking. I have to go to the bank. In these companies, and we all talk about them as platform companies, you are busy shopping on Amazon, and as part of your checkout process, it can give you a loan if you need to have a loan. You don't have to go anywhere else. Now think back on what I've said in the beginning around the social phenomenon. We like convenience. We like the ability to not have to go and think about things. It must be part of my daily life. And all of these examples are basically similar. They have integrated, I think Rakuten or Alibaba, they've also integrated your transactional buying patterns into your banking decisions. So they're taking a more holistic view of your life as opposed to just looking at banking separate from your life. And we can do this today, this notion of integrating banking into our daily life. If you think about Straito, for those of you that's not from Iceland, that's the bus. And for those of you that don't know, unless you've got the exact coins, you can't pay with cash. I found it out because I didn't have the exact coins, and that's one of the few places that don't take credit cards. And it's a long story of how I got my first free bus ride in Iceland. But, you can go and buy on the app every day a ticket on Straito. As a bank, we know that you're buying that ticket because you use your credit card. So we have that transaction. You can also buy an annual pass on Straito that is significantly cheaper. We can, looking at your history, understand and forecast how much you're spending on Straito today. We can look at what the annual pass cost. We can find that information from the internet. We can look at your balance and see that you don't have enough cash to buy that, and therefore that's why you pay every day for a separate ticket. And then we can actually give you an offer and say, we see you buying Straito ticket every day. Why don't you buy the Strato ticket from us? You pay X amount of krona per month. It's less than what you pay today on the daily ticket. It is more than what you would pay if you go to Strato directly if you buy the annual ticket. But the difference is I've given you a cash flow help. I've taken that upfront investment that you need for the Strato ticket and I've spread it over 12 months. And I don't tell you that I've just given you a loan. I've just given you a Strato ticket. And this is part of where you start thinking about how banking can become integrated into your daily life. So what is customer engagement in context of banking? And I go back to what we said in the beginning about the social phenomena. It's about convenience. It's about the ability to do banking when I want to do banking without necessarily being aware that I'm doing banking. It's about trust. And a lot of the stuff that we haven't spoken about today, and that what regulation is trying to protect us from, is what do we do with all of this data? Because as fantastic as it is to think that we can do all of these amazing things with technology, there's unfortunately been enough examples of misuse of this data, or breaking of trust, not necessarily misusing of data. And I'm talking about non-technology companies. If I look at the Enron scandal, there's so many examples out there that you can say that people have broken trust. So how do we do this in a way that trust still remains? It has to be fun. We have to be able to do something in a way that engages the client. We've got to still provide the information. Banking, and the way we will do that in the future is in a way that it is not in the banking terms anymore. How do you make it relevant to the personal terms that people understand? And lastly, you need to have that emotional connection. I've got a couple of examples of what banks are doing, and I'm sure that the slides will be shared afterwards, so I'm not going to go through all the detail. This is my new favorite bank. I want to go and visit DBS in Singapore. They've been voted the best digital bank in 2016, but why am I saying that they're my favorite bank? Not because they've gotten this right as yet, but they're one of the banks out there that's truly trying different things. And I spoke about the fun element, and they've got this thing where they've got the equivalent of Eurovision in Singapore, some, singing competition. So what they do is they have a section in their branch where you can go and audition for the singing competition, because apparently it's quite popular in Singapore. Now, yes, maybe it's out there, maybe it's the wrong way of trying to get fun into the banking world, but at least it's extending our thinking to say, well, this is not just a holy place where we can talk about finances. They've got a complete virtual reality wealth advisor. They've got a robot that answers your questions as you come into the branch. There's USAA. You've seen a lot of the voice stuff demoed today. They're actually doing things about it. And I'll quickly play you a 1-minute video just to show you what's already in their labs. And they only focus on the US military. This is not a public bank for everybody. This is a military bank. Yet they're playing with some of this technology.
Hey Parker, put your shoes on. We're going to be late.
Alexa, ask USAA how I can save $30.
Let me check. I found you received $20 in ATM rebates this month. Should I make the transfer?
Yes.
Okay. $20 have been transferred to Parker's savings account. The new account balance is $34. You can check your Alexa app for further details. Thanks for using USAA Savings Booster Service.
So, if you look at that, they've tried to do a couple of things there. They're adding in some of the emotional side of things as well. Who doesn't feel bad for the kid that doesn't have the right Taka score and da-da-da-da-da. The fact that the kid didn't look after the previous pair, gets lost in the equation there. But it's still trying to get the emotional connection. They've got the platform thinking there. I'm on Amazon. I work with Alexa while I'm on Amazon. Another very interesting one is, and it's very much like the kind of the Google chat format, and they're not the only ones doing this, is Choice Financial that partnered with Doe, where they're doing it in a chat-like setup, and it's all driven by a personal assistant setup. And the personal assistant is not only there for banking. The idea is to extend that to do restaurant bookings and give you recommendations on, where you can get the best deals and so forth. But it does your financial splitting as well, and it looks at that information aspect of trying to give you advice on how to get yourself into a better financial position. All of these are examples of what's happening today. Another I want to look at, which similar to this Choice Financial example, is Buddy Bank. They are launching their first version of their personal assistant in January, February of this year. So what does it actually mean? How do we need to think differently about banking today? When we thought about personalization in the past, we said, okay, we need to give you the right product at the right price in the right way. But what did we do? We applied a generic customer segmentation model that puts you in a box. According to that box, you are suited for certain products. But it's not a full view of you because we've only got a partial view. We only look at your world as we know it. The fact that you may be banking with a whole lot of other places, you may have assets offshore, we don't know. We just segment you based on what we know. We then give you pricing based on your credit profile. So God forbid you've done something wrong in the past, because you will pay for the rest of your life. And then, we want to give it to you in the right way. So please go and set your preferences on the internet banking, because that's the only way that we know how you want to engage. And again, we don't keep up with how you change. So if you change your behavior, you change phones, or you change your whatever technology you want to use, we'll still send you text messages to the same phone that you had in there, unless you remember to go and change it yourself. What is happening today is that, we can look at you, and yes, we still do segmentation, but it's dynamic segmentation that is able to adapt and adjust on what we know, not about you only from our side, but also from external sources. We can look at your transactional behavior. We can look at people like me. We all know that on Amazon, people like you have bought the following books. We can understand your life events. There's a lot of work being done by Stanford at the moment to analyze people's Twitter feeds to be able to get an understanding of where they are in their lives. And maybe even though, you're a 40-plus white African male living in the middle of the Arctic Ocean or on the edge of the Arctic Ocean, I'm not ready to start talking about retirement. So the old segmentation model may say that's what I want to do. The reality is very different. In terms of your price, we can do a whole lot of different things there to be able to truly give you the best value at that point in time and do dynamic pricing. It's not, I got from one of my banks, I'm multi-banked, not only in Iceland, but also in South Africa. I got the price list this week for the new transaction, for the new year. I literally opened it and closed it because firstly, I don't know how all these things add up. And secondly, do I really care? I have to use the bank. So it doesn't really matter what the price list looks like. And then the right way is I can start looking at our engagement behavior. There's technologies out there that can already also start looking at how do you, what are the patterns that you can pick up in terms of your internet usage, your branch engagement, and I can try and be more conversational and not make it the computer says the answer is this. So, to close off, the new reality exists today. We see it in the social world, we see it in terms of how we form habits and how our behavior changes over time. And we want to be delighted. And I once heard the definition of being delighted. And that's basically when someone, what was the exact word? Someone have exceeded your expectations. Surprisingly exceeded your expectations. So it's the unexpectedness of being exceeding your expectations. We have a fast-paced cycle to boredom. And the digital social world is not digital social. It is social. It's the new way of being social. So what do we have to do from a banking perspective? We have a window of opportunity when it comes to trust. Yes, we've done lots of bad things in the past, and I think specifically as it relates to Iceland, it is quite unique in that context. But there's still a level of responsibility that we have and that we feel on how to deal with our clients. And we've got to capitalize on that. But then we've got to evolve our thinking away from, I can go and give you only one way of thinking. I can give you a loan, I can give you an account. We need to move our thinking around products to something like, I can give you a bus ticket. And I think the last 2 points for me are the interesting challenges to say, you know, how can we become invisible? Amazon, we all know Amazon as the brand, but you know it because of what you found on Amazon. If you think about Facebook, what does Facebook generate themselves? We know about Facebook because all of the content that gets generated by our friends and other companies and so forth that's on Facebook. So the challenge for us is to say, how can we become invisible? So it's not about being the bank, but being the enabler. And I think lastly, is that we got to recognize that true human engagement or emotional connection comes from human emotion, not a physical person. We can see it when we look at pictures. But how do we actually capitalize that and start understanding people on a human emotional level as opposed to just an engagement level? Thank you very much.